The Galene Woman talks self-care and mental health. Okay guys, if you saw the little reel that we did this week, or I think it was the other week, definitely not this week, where I complained about the weather and it being really, really hot in the room that I record in, pray for me because it's equally as hot today and it's also really windy, so I'm super worried you guys can hear the door. It is not a vibe, okay? Anyways, after that, welcome to the Galene podcast. I'm Carl, your host, your number one supporter through your self-care journey. I have a wand and everything, I promise. I am the fairy godmother of self-care, even though I am 21 and not even close to middle-aged. So, the usual stuff just before we get started. I want to make sure that you're comfy. I want to make sure that you're doing something just for yourself. Does not have to be complicated at all. Just ready for some self-care and relaxing energy to be telepathically sent to you in the form of this podcast. Just something for you. Doesn't matter what it is, I promise. But it's just so you can say that for the next 25-30 minutes that today you took time for yourself. And that is a big slay, as they say. That's really cringe. I sound like my sisters and this is not good. I need to stop. Anyways, okay, let's go. Big topic today. Self-care, mental health. Let's get into it. I genuinely think that every single post I've ever seen in my life about mental health, when it comes to resources that you can use to aid whatever mental health struggles you're having, uses the phrase self-care. It's mental health problem, you need self-care plus recovery and you'll be fine. And obviously there is truth in that, there always will be, but I really hate how vague it is. I follow a lot of kind of mindfulness apps on Instagram and things like that. Headspace, Calm, their Threads page, guys. You're missing out if you haven't read through that because they're so funny. But there is always this general assumption that your mental health can be solved by this umbrella term, which is self-care. And not only is it more dependent on how you see self-care personally as to whether or not it's going to be something that actually benefits your mental health, but for me, it's kind of multifaceted. Some activities people will say is self-care, like going for a run, eating healthy, going out and socializing, and going to bed at 7 p.m, all these kind of I don't know why that would be a bad thing, but all these things that people use and say and are their self-care are actually something that they're hiding behind to make themselves feel better about their mental health, when in reality it's contributing to it, if that makes sense. And then you also have the flip side of when you really are struggling, when you're going through a depressive episode or, you're having an anxiety attack. Self-care is also the most basic of things, so it doesn't actually feel like it attributes itself to that label. It's a very messy, very complicated relationship, and if you understood anything I just said for the past 10 minutes, I'm very, very impressed. I want to bring us back to the kind of ground level of, so if we're using self-care as something that supports our mental health, what does that look like? What does that mean? What can we do? What is counted as self-care in those moments? And if we ignore the jumble mess of a picture that gets portrayed and the vague umbrella terms that are thrown around, it ultimately comes down to things like this. It's dependent on what level you're at. So if you are somebody that is really, really struggling with their mental health and it is a battle and getting through the day is a success in itself, you're on a very different level to somebody who has anxiety, has panic attacks, but can function, does cook for themselves, does occasionally get to exercise, all this jazz. We're talking about two very, very different experiences of what kind of self-care is going to benefit those two kind of individuals. And there's a spectrum, of course. You might find you're kind of in the middle of that. And I also do think it's dependent of where you're at in your life. For me, I'm going to be talking about my experiences of dealing with my mental health as a student, as an eldest daughter who is in her early 20s, somebody who doesn't have the same level of responsibility as others out there. And you have to take those into account when you're thinking about what this is going to mean for you. And I hope, even though I am only providing one perspective, you'll find something useful out of this, because I will really try and make sure that I am inclusive in the way I'm talking about this. Navigating mental health, even when you're in a good place, can just feel particularly weird. Do you know what I mean? Like, even the phrase mental health, most of us could agree that it's a very past 15 years kind of phrase, you know? Generationally speaking, we are the first to talk about what mental health is, how to define it, what it encompasses in terms of its symptoms. And when I say symptoms, I mean negative mental health symptoms. We are the first of a long, long line of people to finally acknowledge that that is something in itself needing to be looked after. It's not another chore. It's not another thing on the list of things to do. It's just something that we holistically have to think about in our everyday. We do. I fundamentally believe that. I remember last week talking to my mum about, the fact that these words just didn't exist. These phrases, these connotations with those words just didn't have the same impact. I feel like it was a little bit hippy-dippy for the 70s and 80s to be considering your mental health. So we really are the first ones to be figuring out the line of action as to how something like self-care can benefit your mental health. But I definitely do think that kind of fact that we're the first people to really be talking about this and deciphering what all these terms mean and how they can look to us as individuals, it still permeates us, those old traditional stigmas, those old traditional ideas of actually feeling comfortable to open up. Because I think most people nowadays would be very comfortable saying, yes, we need to talk about our mental health and admit when we're not feeling okay and we're not feeling like life is lifing in the right way. But actually doing that is a whole different step. And especially as a platform focused on rest and relaxation for women, women's health in itself is a problem, like let alone how our mental health has been viewed in the past. So making it an actionable thing is really difficult, and figuring that out even more so. But self-care, I do believe, is the answer, and understanding how self-care works for you is definitely the answer. My personal experiences with this, my mental health management, is absolutely reliant on my self-care and my routines. That I feel like routines is the wrong word, because when it comes to my mental health, it's not something I necessarily do every day that guarantees I will be able to deal with that situation, if that makes sense. So it's almost as if these things that I have come to do when I know I'm struggling are the things that I repeatedly turn to, and I know that are going to be good for me in those moments. So even though I do self-care on a daily or weekly basis, and I do things that ultimately will benefit my mental health, I'm also conscious of the fact that there are some situations and experiences I will have throughout life that just trigger me and make me feel like, I've gone backwards or whatever. But in reality, I haven't. It's just that situation. And now I'm in a position to be able to turn around and say, I have things that I do that help me manage those. I know myself well enough now. Not completely, but, we get there. I know myself well enough to know that there are things I can do for myself that are acts of self-care. They come under that umbrella that help me manage what's going on, especially during moments of difficulty with my PMDD. It's so difficult when you're already actively fighting against your brain to be managing other things. But honestly, as much as PMDD is horrid and has a huge impact on my mood and really has changed my perspective on the way in which, your menstrual cycle impacts your life, my struggles with anxiety, off the back of PMDD and beforehand, have been probably more impactful in my life in terms of mental health management and self-care working together. Because I'm going to be 100% honest here. I was an anxiety denier. And I mean that in myself, as in I I was very reluctant to admit to myself that I had anxiety and that I suffered with anxiety in any form. And I think the thing is like, it's very easy to assume that even if you've suffered with anxiety once, that suddenly you're always going to suffer with it. And I don't think that is the case, but having bouts of anxiety is definitely a very normal thing. And I know for a fact that I've had that. You know, if we go back way back when, if we take the journey to back to 17-year-old Cole, a lot of people around me at that point did have anxiety. I was in a very high stress environment, purely and simply because the friends I had were anxious people. And that's not their fault. That's not my fault. That's just life. And, you know, I'm living in a generation that has more anxiety and depression than any generation prior. I think it's quite normal that I think a lot of people who are around my age listening to this will agree that there has been a lot of anxious people around. But for me, for a long time, what I reflect on now and know is anxiety. I just kind of thought at the time was just a bit of nervousness, you know, despite the fact that it was very, very overwhelming. Or maybe for a time it was, I don't know. But despite the fact that it was very, very overwhelming, I didn't think that that was anxiety. Because I didn't have traditional panic attacks. I wasn't crying and hyperventilating. I've never actually, that's a lie, I have had panic attacks. That is not the right thing to say. I definitely have had panic attacks, but it's not the way my anxiety manifests. That is what I'm trying to say here. And it's ultimately not what it's ended up being. You know, bouts of anxiety have come up at various points in my life. But yeah, I would say the first proper experience anxiety attack I had was at age 17. And for those of you who don't really know the differences between like panic attacks and anxiety attacks, because these things get thrown around a lot, panic attack is usually a pretty instantaneous thing, usually hyperventilation, crying. It's very, very quick, all of a sudden overwhelming feeling of dread and just complete like desperation, and you kind of get a bit of a hot sweat on, and it's just all a little bit stressful, and it's just like like instantly. Whereas an anxiety attack is like a slow burn. You're not necessarily going to be hyperventilating. You're not necessarily going to be, you know, falling on the floor crying, but you are suddenly, it's like a climax to a very long period of feeling very, very anxious, very, very anxious. And for me, the first time I kind of had that gradual build of anxiety to the point where it just had me in tears was my first time of college. And it got to the point where I was basically being sick every morning. Like, not to kind of sugarcoat it, like that's exactly what was happening. Like, the stress of getting to school was a very difficult situation for me, and I had an awkward situation with a boy that was also getting on my train, and I had the stress of like figuring out my A levels and all this kind of stuff. And although these are like very normal things, it led to me being so stressed and anxious about getting everything done and sorted and finished and whatever, that I literally woke up and within 5 minutes I was being sick. And I would love to say that I got better at managing my symptoms of anxiety at that point in my life. Like, I would love to say that I went through the first year of college and I was suddenly able to deal with my anxiety. But that is just not the truth. Like, my first year of A-levels, for all of us who will remember these fateful days, ended up being the first year of COVID. And it meant that I was at home. It meant that, like, even though I was studying online and all this kind of jazz, like, I was in reality very calm. I was in a very calm space. And it meant that I suddenly wasn't suffering with the same stresses and the same triggers as I was before. So I just kind of thought, well, it's over. Boy, was I wrong. And I was basically just ignoring the problem. I was ignoring the things that I knew, if we went back to normal life, which we obviously eventually did, they would come back with full force, and I would be ignoring and dealing with the same situation all over again. So what ended up happening is it all kind of climaxed in a really big way, in terms of I was struggling to get through the day without a crippling sense of anxiety. Just before my father passed away, which is so inevitable it hurts, I had fallen out with a lot of friends at that point. I had just broken up with my very first boyfriend, which we all know is an incredibly traumatic experience. I was working a job that genuinely was horrific. And I won't go into details on that one, but genuinely was just not in a great space. And it just meant that, like, literally every single day, the things that I had been ignoring and pushing down and pretending didn't exist for months and months and months and months, even after I had gone back after COVID, and even after I'd done all my A levels and whatever, like, after this whole experience, I was just like refusing to deal with it. And that 2-month period was probably one of the hardest points in my life, not just because of my dad, but because I genuinely couldn't get out of bed without feeling like I was going to be sick. And I had this really horrible situation, which I think was the point that I just decided, I need to deal with this. I need to figure out what this is, where it involved my ex-boyfriend, it involved cancelled trains, it involved having to stay at his and having no other choice. And that was the first time so initially, even though I had that period at the beginning of college and where I was being sick, I'd managed to not be sick for a very long time. And the next point that I was sick was this event. And it's one of those things where you get so good at pretending that you're not struggling, and you get so good at pretending that there's not a lot of things going wrong, that when you cannot do anything other than stare it in the face because it's literally in front of you in all its manifestations, you realize that you've got to the point where you have to do something. And that was my first therapy experience, and it was the first time where I sat down with myself and was honest about what was actually going on in my head, what was actually making me anxious, what was actually making me push these feelings away, and really working hard to pretend that they're not happening. And then having a situation like my dad passing and going through all these very emotional situations with friends and relationships. And I remember just sitting in his room, and like I'm very grateful to one particular friend who I had at that time, who I called, and I basically stayed on the phone with until 3 a.m. when he returned, and when my ex-boyfriend returned. And it's in those moments that you just kind of, I don't even know how to put this in words. The yapper of the century doesn't know how to put this in words. You've gone through so much that if you don't do something, you're not convinced you're going to make it, unfortunately. I think that's ultimately where it goes, and where my brain was at that point in my life. And, undiagnosed PMDD, not dealing with my anxiety, all these external emotional situations, like, there's just no way that I was able to cope anymore. And so I went to therapy, and I took myself out of every situation that I knew was causing me anxiety, and I decided this was it. This was where things needed to change. And don't get me wrong, it was not a quick process. It took me years to actually figure out how to deal with what I was going through at that particular point. And I have had situations since then that have absolutely tested me in terms of what the hell, and I actually started getting honest with myself. So I went to therapy. Moving on to a slightly happier note, I went to therapy, and it took me a couple tries to find a therapist that actually worked for me. And, I sat there and I really thought about and talked about what I'd been experiencing. And it became very, very clear that a big part of my anxiety was this need to maintain a level of perfectionism, not just in my academic life, but in my personal life, that was actually destroying me. This need to keep everything inside and everything perfect and everything nice and tidy and neat and pristine in all the triggers that I was facing and all the things that I was trying to push away. That's what was making me anxious. That was what was making me sick. And I knew that if I didn't embrace some level of imperfection, like just a little bit, this was going to be a problem that I faced forever. And that is so much easier said than done. But I kind of made a promise to myself, I think, if I really truly reflect about that time, I went and traveled. I pushed myself out of my comfort zone. I talked to complete strangers. I forced myself, weirdly enough, into situations that were never going to be perfect, that were never going to be what I was trying to aspire and attain. I had an incredible summer. Then I went to Cambridge. And that pushed me even further. And I think if any of you have listened to the last season's episode on PMDD, a lot of the things I've just said you'll probably remember or might remember. And being at Cambridge was definitely one of the worst points for my PMDD specifically. I think my focus on anxiety and my focus prior to this on trying to just maintain some level of calm meant that in those calm moments, I started to realize, wow, there's a huge fluctuation in my moods, and really get honest with myself about that. That's what was happening. So you couple the fact that I was really struggling, figuring out anxiety, figuring out PMDD. This was really just one of the hardest points of my life. Like, I was so far away from all of my support networks. My family, my friends, my boyfriend at the time, like a different boyfriend, you will be glad to know. And everyone was miles away, and I still hadn't quite figured out what was the right thing to do. The panic attacks were really not it. I just really felt like I couldn't escape the pressure. So that's the backstory on all the things that my self-care is saving me from. I guess the next big question is how did it help? How did self-care save me from this horrid cycle that I found myself going through over and over and over and over again? I feel like you can hear it in the way I talk about it. It just permeated every element of my life, and I really had no idea in reality what to do. Even though I was so focused and intent on fixing the problem, my methodology wasn't necessarily successful until probably my second term of Cambridge. Nearing the end of my second term at Cambridge. How did I do this? Well, therapy, for starters. But also, I think I started to embrace a side of myself that I had never done before. I started journaling when I felt like I needed it because I was feeling anxious, or I was feeling my PMDD symptoms of irritability and depression or whatever. Regular exercise, just regular eating. That was a big thing. Just making sure that because obviously after being sick so many times, it's kind of like you get scared to eat because you're anxious that you're going to throw it all up. So I just made it a goal to regularly eat, and that was like such a big success. And I also then really focused on cultivating good friendships while I was at Cambridge. I knew that suddenly it became really obvious that this was going to be a really important aspect of me looking after myself, was making sure that my support networks were close to me in some sense, that they weren't just all on the phone. And I think that's a really big one when you're going through big life events that involve moving. I'm currently reflecting a lot on this because I'm going into my final year. I'm deciding where I want to go, where I want to live, what I want to do. And thinking back to that time where I was trying to navigate my mental health and how my mental health was being supported in those moments, cultivating good, strong, happy friendships that really fulfilled me in what I needed to keep, or just to help me feel good and feel positive about my life, was such an important thing. I cannot, especially if you're just about to go to university or you've just got through your first year and your first year was a bit of a mess, which is usually the case, knowing that you have one or two friends that you can call, you can text, who live around the corner or live close enough to jump on a bus or a train or a bike, whatever, really does change the game when it comes to just peace of mind. Honestly, I talk about Rose. I don't know if I've talked about Neve a lot on here, mainly because she works for Galene. But Neve, I've got a couple guy friends, Finn, who also works for Galene, who genuinely, if I'm struggling like really bad, I'm gonna call them up. I'm gonna be like, guys, I need your help. And the way that helped me manage my anxiety around everything, guys, I cannot stress enough. I would be a hobbling mess without them. And so, what did I learn from that? Self-care does not just have to be the single activities you do for yourself. As much as that is part of it, managing my mental health meant that I needed people I knew and love were going to be close by if I had a problem. Don't get me wrong, I still very, very much have my moments. And, there's been a lot of anxiety this summer around Galene, about life, and there's a lot of things that can trigger you and leave you kind of in fear mode, especially if you're worried about the opinions of others or you're going into something that's really, really big and life-changing. Self-care can really just shift that perspective if you know what that looks like for you in that moment. I truly do find when I give myself the space and I give myself the systems, that makes it sound really like, I don't know, ticking the box, but I give myself the kind of mental mind map plan of, okay, I'm going through a hard time right now. What do I need? It changes the way I can calm down. If you're in the pits of it, like if you are in the dark depths of mental health challenges, perspective really just does become everything, and anxiety can really crush that ability to see what's going on. I also think there's a big thing with assuming something won't work because it doesn't, because it feels so difficult in the moment, I know that when I'm having a panic attack or I'm really feeling my anxiety or my PMDD is just kind of feeding everything, that it can feel really hard to just sit there and breathe. Do you know what I mean? Like breath work, drawing those triangles and squares or whatever. That kind of thing can feel really, really hard for me. And I used to get such mental block over doing that kind of mini self-care, mindful thing. But now I kind of have this trust in myself that I can calm myself down, because I know that I can assess the situation if I need someone to come over, or if I can calm myself down with whatever I need to not fix the problem, but just take that spiky, aggressive edge off of what I'm experiencing, Nothing about this, I feel like this episode, the kind of slight chaoticness of this episode sums this up. Nothing about the way you solve your mental health or you support your mental health has to be perfect. Nothing about it has to work every time. You may have golden things that you rely on and it just doesn't fit in that moment, but something else does, and that's okay. It's more than okay if the only thing that is going to calm you down right now is to scream into a pillow or cry or just keep walking till you hit the motorway. But knowing your ways of coping and what's there for you and how those moments can be handled if and when they arise is fundamental. That is, in essence, in definition, self-care. Because then you can build the things around it that you and I might know as self-care, that you and I might traditionally think of self-care, having a hot shower, having a bath, putting comfy clothes on, XYZ. You can build those things into what's going on at the time. And also, it means that you can go further once you've kind of figured those things out. By practicing any sort of self-care, the chances of those scary moments having the impact on you that they have in the past does really diminish. I am going to give you a perfect example because I needed this episode as much as, if you're listening to this episode, you may need it too. This summer has been a little bit nerve-wracking for me because I have quite a scary trip coming up. And it's not scary in the sense of I'm taking a really long plane and that scares me or anything like that. I am going back to a particular place that I haven't been to in a long while, and there's a lot of memories there, good and also very bad, and ultimately I have no choice. I do have to go there. I have dissertation research to do, lucky me, and I've paid for the trip and I really don't want to lose out on that money basically, but it makes me super anxious. thinking about going there and the things I might have to do and the things and the people that I might have to see and, you know, the old memories that are absolutely going to come up. And initially, I really didn't know if I was going to be able to manage and cope with the anxiety that was going to feel off the back of this, because it's an entirely new situation. I've had a lot of situations that have tested me, as I say, with the things that I like to do to make myself feel better when I'm feeling anxious. But this is an entirely different one. This is a new level for Cole. But I really want to go. I think that's the thing that I also keep telling myself. As much as I have all this fear, I really, 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 really want to go back because I love this city. I think this place is amazing. And as much as there is a lot of anxious things there, I felt really at home being in this place. So it's a very confusing, paradoxical trip. And so since I knew this was going to be a trip that was going to test me, that was going to have a few things in it that weren't necessarily going to be my favorite thing on the planet, I have spent a lot of time really thinking about and actively pursuing things in my self-care that can make me feel better, that can just take that edge off the whole situation. You know, I've been going on a lot of mindful walks and I've been thinking about the things that I find triggering. And as much as that's hard, like I've gained so much perspective on it. And, you know, I've spent a lot less time on my phone. This is a biggie because a lot of the things that I find triggering could very well easily pop up on my phone. And, you know, just by not engaging with it, it's really just helped me feel like that this trip is about me and not what happened. And I also went to Edinburgh. This was a big thing because Edinburgh, I find, is always a bit of a reset city for me. My aunt and uncle live up there and I go stay with them and see my cousins who are like 10 years younger than me. So it's playing board games and running around playing tag. Like, it's such a different space to my home space where I've been sitting and trying to avoid and embrace the anxiousness, shall we say? And it really helped. And now I can sit here a week away from this trip, a little anxious for sure, but oh my God, do I have a big sense of peace, a big sense of calm energy, a big sense of just what will be, and I control XYZ, and that's all that matters. That's all that matters. You know yourself. I think that's what all this Cole rambling means. You know yourself. You know the things that you are going to find triggering, and you know the things that aren't going to be good for you. That can be places, that can be people, that can be actions, whatever. And if there is one thing I have learned about knowing yourself and spending time learning what that means, it's that taking the time to just sit with it and figure it out and figure out what you're going to do if it arises, if it happens again, will probably change your life. If you haven't done this, if you've never actually just sat with yourself and thought, hey, I know I'm a pretty anxious person. What is it actually that makes me anxious? And really actually think about those. Is it my academics? Is it relationships? Is it my parents? Is it exercise? Is it food? Like what is it that I actually, not the specific situation, but what are the things that make me feel this way? You will be able to understand yourself on a level you have never even contemplated before. You will have a self-awareness that most people don't have or want to even think about. It will help future you with that hard stuff. Knowing what you find relaxing, soothing, calming can help you navigate the tough stuff. You will know if you need people right now. You'll know if you need to just be alone. You'll know if you need to just keep walking around and thinking about it all. You'll know that there will be food that you will like, that will make you feel good. It does not have to be healthy. It just will make you feel good in that moment. And it's not going to be a crazy situation. Do you want a bath or a hot shower? Like, you'll have the answers to those questions. And in those moments where it can feel like time is standing still, or it can feel like nothing is going to solve it, there'll be that little voice in your head that says, I know that there's something I can do that's going to make me feel better. Even if I don't want to do it right now, I know it's there. And the world of wonder that will do for your little brain, insurmountable. Just one step at a time as well. You know, when I'm anxious, when I'm having a panic attack, or I'm feeling like I'm going to throw up from anxiety, like, I'm not sitting there thinking, yeah, I'm going to journal about this. Like, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, I know right now I need XYZ person. Or I know right now that I just need to be by myself. Or I know right now that I need some food, or I need a glass of water, or something really basic like that. I am not saying that self-care in the moments when you're feeling anxious have to be the most extensive hour-long plans. I'm not gonna be like, right, yeah, I'm about to put my silk PJs on, I'm gonna have an everything shower, I'm gonna XYZ, I'm gonna journal for 15 minutes, and then I'm gonna eat a really delicious meal that I prepped, and then I'm gonna, no. I am talking about systems that actually don't involve anything more than a yes or no, usually. And that is self-care. And don't let anybody in your life tell you otherwise. That is self-care, because you are doing something for yourself to make sure you are looked after. And that is it. Simple as that. Screw everyone else. It's all you need to do is what you want to do, what you think you need in that moment. This is about making you happy and calm. And there's no other point that is relevant. If you have taken anything from my rambles, I hope it's that you can see that these things are an ever evolving thing that change and move as you get older, and things that you don't find triggering when you're 17, 16 suddenly are awful when you're 25, and the things that you were not stressed about at 25 suddenly feel horrendous at 30, and older and older and older. And something that self-care can offer you, and an investment in your self-care and the things that you find comforting and relaxing, and defining what those things are, is that those moments have an answer. Those moments don't feel endless. There is a little bit of light. And yeah, it might not work. It might not feel as good as it did the first time you did it, but it means you can make an adjustment. If you think, okay, I need to be alone, and then suddenly you're like, actually, I really want to call my mom. Like, call your mum. Do you know what I mean? Or call whoever you need in that moment. The subtle changes will make a huge difference in terms of your ability to manage the hard mental health situations. Seriously, I cannot stress it enough. And if you want guides, if you want things like a step-by-step to just help you figure it out, define it, and then know that it's there, I am more than happy to write that 5 list of questions that you probably should think about. And I'm not going to say that they're easy questions, but I'll do it for you if you need it, because that is what Galene is here for. That is what we're doing. And I think that's probably quite a nice little way to end quite a heavy episode. If you need anything, if you found this episode difficult, please reach out. Please seek the people who you know are going to be good points of contact. We are always here to listen and help. We are not medical experts. We are normal people, and that is something that gets missed a lot these days. So I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining me today at the Galene Woman podcast. I hope you feel that you're not alone in struggling with your mental health. Absolutely not. And that you also feel like that there is a bit of hope as well. I hope that has shown you something. I am more than happy to outline more things you can do for your mental health that are self-care, that will really change the game. I'm really happy to keep this conversation going because I think it's a really, really important one. Men and women and everybody in the world, however you identify, like genuinely, this is a conversation we need to keep having and figure out how it looks like in our world. If you want more immediate resources, tips, just nudges in the right direction, our blog, the Galene Company blog at www.galenecompany.com, has so many things there waiting and ready for you to listen and read and just go through at your own pace. It's there. And obviously there's episodes of this podcast too prior to this particular one that might just have something in it that just changes the way you engage with looking after yourself and your rest. Obviously our social medias are there too. Reach out if you want, totally available. And yeah, until next time, my darling, take care of yourself, take care of each other, take care of your mental health because you deserve it.